Okay, so primarily what we're going to talk about today is answering off-case positions, because that is one of the biggest jobs of the MG. So as an MG, you really have to just deal best you can with whatever the LO chooses to throw at you. Your job is to successfully answer the on and off case positions, as well as you want to make the MO impossible. You want to, try to do your best to spread out the MO. So 95 to, 99% of the time, this is going to mean answering off-case positions. So that's really what we're going to focus on today, is how to do that. So, so what is the difference between an on-case argument and an off-case argument? So what's an on-case argument?
On-case is directly responding to the PMC. Off-case is everything else.
Right. Make sense? It's pretty intuitive. It's on the case. Yeah. Okay, so things you should be remembering as you're answering off-case positions. The first is that you should order the arguments and positions strategically. So when you set out to answer the positions, you'll start out by creating a logical roadmap for the debate. So that will usually start with procedurals or theory arguments, then probably your case, and then the disads, counterplans, or critiques. So you think of the roadmap just as the pieces of paper, so everybody is on the same page. That's what the roadmap is. So in terms of answering the off-case positions, another important thing is to diversify your arguments. You should have different types of responses on each off-case position. So we'll talk about what all those options are in a second. But just remember, you should diversify as best as possible. Additionally, you should be allocating your time wisely. That's one of the really tricky things for really all the speeches, particularly the MG, because you have to deal with so many different things oftentimes. So you want to make sure you leave yourself enough time to answer everything. And one tool that a couple people that debate use that has been successful for them is to sort of take note of how long it takes the LO to read the position, to sort of give a general idea of about how much time you should be spending answering it. And usually it'll be a little bit more than what the LO spent, so that way you don't run out of time. Additionally, you want to make sure to win your case. Nothing is worse in the MG than putting your case on the bottom and not being able to get to it, right? So your partner has already given you 7 minutes of offense, right, that you get to use to answer other positions, as well as to use your advantages to try to outweigh the disads or the other positions. So win your case. Put it early in your order. Maybe, deal with any procedural or theory issues that are a priori, or come first in the judge's evaluation, and then try to address the case so you make sure you win your arguments and can use that to outweigh. The most important thing, if you take nothing else away from the lecture, the MG needs to have offense, offense, offense. So what is the difference between an offensive and a defensive argument? So what is a defensive argument?
Like a no link.
Like a no link, yes. So it is a mitigating argument, and no link is an example of one of those. So they say your plan collapses the economy. A defensive argument would say no, we don't. That would be an example of a no link argument. As opposed to an offensive argument, which has an impact that sort of is tied to it. And this is, you'll start to notice this maybe in your debates. You can, if you're still confused about this, ask your judges to help point out examples of those to you. So an example of an offensive argument is, so the disad has a link that says that plan collapses the economy again. An offensive argument would say, no, plan saves the economy. Plan makes the economy better, right? So they say plan collapses the economy and has some bad impact tied to it. You are able to capture that impact and say, no, we solve for that. All of a sudden, this is in our favor. So that's the difference between offensive and defensive arguments. Now, you'll probably want to have both offensive and defensive arguments on each position, with a couple exceptions to that rule, I suppose. But again, that's part of diversification, is both having the offense and the defense. But the offense is important because it allows you to capture that impact and it is the impacts at the end of the day that the judge is using to make their decision. So the more offense you have, the better chance you have of winning the debate. Make sense? Okay. If you have trouble coming up with offensive arguments, a lot of times the defensive arguments are the more intuitive arguments that you'll probably think of first in the heat of the moment, right? Like, this won't lead to nuclear war, you know? Like, those are sort of the more, you know, you're not right about this, that's not true. So offensive arguments can be a little tricky to come up with on the spot, and that's one of those things that practice will help a lot with. But use your case for offense as much as possible, if all else fails, you know? A lot of times, I'm using econ as an example a lot, but so if you have an advantage that talks about why plan saves the economy, and they have a disad about how you collapse the economy, use each one of your links or the reasons why plan solves back for your economic advantage as reasons why, as link terms and reasons why you are able to actually save the economy. So use your case as much as possible. So now we'll go through sort of answering the different types of positions, unless anyone has questions about any of that.
I just got one general one.
Yeah.
I think the idea that defense is kind of a mitigating argument is really, really clear and concise and easy to understand. What would be a good example of an offensive argument with a clear definition?
See, and it's a bit tricky to define, so that's something maybe ask someone else on staff as well. For me, I conceptualize it as an argument in which you're saying the opposite of what they say to have an impact tied to it, right? So they say plan kills Chinese relations. Your offensive argument says, no, we actually save those relations. Another offensive argument is they say the U.S. Use of the military is bad. An offensive argument would say, no, that's good, and it's good because it prevents war, right?
There's no clear conceptual definition of kind of what offense is.
I mean, that's how I conceptualize it. I'm sure if you ask some of the other people on staff, they probably have their own versions of it, but that's how I like to, that's, yeah, the simplest way that I've been able to formulate an answer to that. So, okay, so we'll start off by going through how to answer a disad. So, what is the general structure of a disad? What are the parts? Uniqueness. And what is uniqueness?
What's happening now in SQL?
So, description of the status quo. What comes next?
The link.
The link, yes. And what is a link?
How the plan changes the status quo.
How the plan changes the status quo. Yeah, very good. Next. Internal link. What is the internal link?
The connection between the link and the impact.
Yes. Additional steps between the bad thing that the plan does and how the plan is actually creating that. Sometimes there are additional necessary steps. And lastly, impact. Yes. So this is the flow of the disad. How can the MG respond?
Non-unique.
So non-unique. And what does that mean?
I actually wouldn't be able to give a good definition.
Sure.
of that.
So a non-unique argument is basically you're just saying the opposite of the uniqueness argument, right? So if they say, well, we'll just fill in an example to make this easier. We'll just call this U.S.-China relations disad. That's pretty easy to conceptualize. So U.S.-China relations tenuous, but okay in the SQL. Link, plan, kills those relations for whatever reason it does that. Internal link and the impact is just going to be more. We'll just simplify this for now. So, basic story. So, what would the non-unique be in response to this?
U.S.-China relations are awesome, and they're going to be okay no matter what.
So, the argument you want to make is the non-unique. That is a good example of a uniqueness overwhelmed argument. So remember, the uniqueness argument is always going to say things are generally okay, right? And you want to say that as the neg because then there's only much more of a risk that plan messes everything up, right? So you want to say things are generally okay, but you don't want to say, you know, they're so okay that there's no risk that the plan will be able to mess it up. So we'll get to that in a second when we talk about uniqueness overwhelmed. So what is the non-unique?
Relations are terrible.
So relations are the worst. If we don't have plan, we're all screwed and the war is going to happen anyways. So U.S., China relations are bad. So then the other way to address uniqueness is with a uniqueness overwhelmed. Which says, as was pointed out, that relations are awesome. And based on these two types of responses, hopefully that'll help you kind of think about when you're writing uniqueness as the neg, why you have to sort of have this weird, not quite one way or the other. They're tenuous, they're fragile, but things are okay. So that way, the MG can either say, no, it's the opposite, or if your uniqueness is too strong, then relations are so awesome, there's no risk that the plan can do anything to mess that up. So that's sort of the MG on the uniqueness level. Okay, what about the link level?
No.
So no link. And is that, as we talked about, that's an example of a defensive argument. So what would a no link look like for this example?
Doesn't kill relations?
Yeah. So this plan doesn't do that. What else on the link level? A link turn, yeah. Which is an offensive argument. A turn is always an offensive argument. So what would the link turn be?
Helps relations.
So it helps relations, yes. Increases relations. So already you can see sort of the relationship between these arguments, particularly the non-unique and the link turn. So something you're going to hear a lot in debates is uniqueness controls the direction of the link. Now, what does that mean? So you can look at in this example, if you are winning your non-unique argument that U.S.-China relations are really bad, then there's a risk that plan might be able to save those relations, right? That's your link turn. It's bad now, but the plan is necessary to solve back for those things. If you don't win your uniqueness argument, then you have the example that U.S.-China relations are tenuous, but they're pretty good. But if they're already pretty good, then there's probably not a reason why the plan is going to make those that much better, or an impact why making them that much better matters, right? So the uniqueness controls the direction of the link. So if they're okay now, plan only has a risk of making them worse, or if they're bad now, plan only has a risk of making them better. Does that make sense? So you want to be pairing non-unique arguments with a link turn. Similarly, that is why you don't want to make both of these uniqueness arguments. So you want to do non-unique and link turn, which is often more strategic because then that provides you an additional avenue to generate offense, because remember, offense is much harder for the MO to deal with. So you don't want to read both of those at the same time. Or the other option is just to read, no, there is no way plan is going to mess this up. read Uniqueness Overwhelmed, so relations are way too awesome according to your description, and you can add some reasons why that's true, and then no link, additional reasons why there's no way plan can mess that up. Make sense?
So you want to, sorry, what are
So
the terms
non-unique-
again? Non-unique with link
With link turn, Uniqueness Overwhelmed, and no link. And you can read no links as well with this strategy, but you just want to make sure that you're not doing Uniqueness Overwhelmed with link turns, because you're not controlling the uniqueness. So again, remember, uniqueness controls the direction of the link. Similarly, a lot of times what will happen in lower level debates is, they'll be winning the uniqueness, the neg will win that relations are okay, but then, the MG and the PMR will say, no, but we're winning our link turn. But without that uniqueness argument, the impact to this is far more mitigated, really doesn't make as much of a difference, because if things are really great now, then you probably don't make them that much greater. There's not really an impact to them being improved at all. Okay, what else? What about the internal link? What can we do there? So we'll just call it no internal link. A lot of times you'll just have specific defense there. So you can make arguments why there's no tension, or why that tension does not lead to war. And, with impacts being so far-fetched most of the time, sometimes that's a really good place where you can just dump a lot of good, smart defensive arguments. No, Israel and Iran or, various other countries are not going to go to war. They're certainly not going to use nuclear weapons. Those types of arguments. And again, example of a defensive argument. Your arguments are not true. Similarly, on the impact level, you can have a no impact argument, which is basically the same thing, just mitigating the impact. And a lot of times on the impact level, it's going to be that, no, they're not going to use nukes, no, this country is not going to be drawn in, those types of arguments. What else can you do on the impact level? Impact turn, yeah. So what would an impact turn look like?
Nuclear war good.
So war good.
So would you use both of those? Like, could you be like, first, their impact doesn't exist, but even if you don't buy that, turn their impact war is good?
Well,
Or would you not want to say both of those?
that's sort of a strategic decision. If you're going to impact turn, most of the time that's something that you're probably going to have prepped beforehand. The important thing to remember is, in order to deal with your arguments, in order to kick out of a position, the MO is going to need to deal with your offense. That's what is most scary. And the way they get out of those arguments is by extending your defense. So a lot of times when you impact turn, you'll want to probably have some maybe an argument or two on the uniqueness level, but you're probably just going to want to go for the impact turns. If you feel like you have 6 to 8 really awesome impact turns, then you should probably just say, fuck it, we're just going to impact turn you. We are just right on this. But if you're maybe just coming up with this because you don't have very good responses to the other parts of that, sometimes it is good to have other defensive arguments and just be like, you know what, we've got some solid arguments, but honestly, I would rather they extend some of my defense and kick out of this position, right? Scare them off of it. So they would, because if you read these two arguments together, what you're saying is the war is not going to happen and the war is good, right? So they can say, well, if there's not going to be a war, then neither of our impacts matter. It's neither good nor bad. There is no war, right?
Yeah.
And so then they can get rid of that position because it no longer matters in the debate. So it really is sort of a contextual
Yeah.
issue of what is most strategic in the debate. But if you're going to impact turn, I don't know. When I impact turn, it was usually because I went in with a bunch prepped ahead of time, in which case it was like, no, you have to deal with this now. You're stuck with all the turns. You're going to have to go for this. So it really depends how prepared you are to go for those, I think. Okay, so questions about responding to a disad. Other important thing. You do not want to link turn and impact turn at the same time. Why is that? So it's a double turn. What does that mean?
Well, basically you're saying that plan increases relations, but then war is also good. So.
Right. So you're saying that relations are bad now, but we solved it. Hooray, we've solved the disad, and all of a sudden we're avoiding this really awful war. But then you're also saying, but that war is good. So you have now double turned yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So don't link turn and impact turn. Pick a strategy. And just stylistically in responding generally on any off-case position, there's really sort of two different styles. There's, let's address the uniqueness level, then let's address the link level, then let's address the impact level. That is strategic insofar as, you're able to very specifically respond to things. The judge has the arguments next to the competing arguments, so it's easier for them to conceptualize. There's also sort of the more shotgun method where it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 arguments, and perhaps they're not in this order. They're shuffled up. Sometimes people will read, here's my non-unique, here's my link turn, here's my non-unique, here's my link turn. In that type of order, not as strategic because the arguments aren't next to each other on the flow, but also sometimes it makes the job harder for the MO because I can't group arguments as effectively, and also they might miss an offensive argument that's towards the bottom or the top. So it's really a stylistic thing, what works best for you. I think I sort of did both. Yeah.
In policy, when answering a politics disad, typically people will do policymaker can do both, which is if there's an intrinsic term. Do we have that in our
Yes and no. It's not really something that's very popular. You should talk to Nick Robinson about that because he has a lot of thoughts on that. Not super popular, certainly is an argument that gets made from time to time. But yeah, you should ask Nick more about that. But it's an argument you can make. It might not get as much traction unless you spend a lot of time explaining why you get to do that and why that's beneficial. Okay. Other questions about disads and answering them? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you always have to attack each part of a disad with, like not all those arguments, because I just understood that you don't want to do every single one, but do you have to always attack every single one, or if you take out their uniqueness and link and then you solve their impact, can you just be done?
Yeah.
Do you have to attack every single part every time?
Right. It makes the MO's job much more difficult the more arguments that are strategic together that you have.
Okay.
Do you have to? No. But it's obviously, when I say diversify your arguments, it's good to have multiple levels. For example, you will probably want to non-unique and link turn and focus more heavily on that than maybe some of the more impact or no-link arguments or those defensive arguments. But it's good for you to still have a few, particularly on the impact level and the internal link level, just because if they have clean access to their impact and there's nothing for them to have to deal with there, then all of a sudden it makes their job a lot easier, and the judge is like, oh, they have clean access to their impact when they're in the MO, if they do win the uniqueness link level. So you want to try to diversify. I would say typical is, have 2 or 3 different uniqueness arguments, have 2 or 3 different link turns, and a little bit of defense on this level.
Yeah.
Even if it's just mad checks, this doesn't go nuclear, right? You want to make sure to have something there.
Okay.
But yeah, so you can sort of think of your responses as a template almost, because you have all these different options. A lot of times, you'll choose which one you choose to go for is a matter of comfort, just which arguments are you more familiar with, what comes to you first. But I know a lot of people that when the uniqueness comes out, that's when they determine their strategy and how they're going to answer it. They don't even need for the neg to get to the link yet. It's really dependent on, well, which way is your uniqueness really leaning, and then going from there in terms of which strategy gets used. Do you have a question?
I was also just going to mention another strategic choice that you could make is that if you know the team is going to read a certain position, like a couple of years ago with the elections dissad, we kind of knew people were going to go that way, so we just put a lot of time into like the non-unique and the link turn, and just forced them to go for that argument.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. I feel like there was one other thing I wanted to mention.
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
How popular are internal link turns?
Oh yeah, that's another thing, internal link turns. These are all sort of no impact, no internal link, impact turn, internal link turn, sort of the same thing. I would say internal link turns are, I don't know, somewhat popular. Certainly a viable option. And it's literally the same thing, you're just saying the internal link is good. So there's some step in the internal links that is a good thing and results in good consequences, right? So yeah, that's certainly a viable option. I would say equally as popular as impact turning, because oftentimes these two things are so similar.
So an internal link term for this one would be that the higher tensions are good.
Yeah, and
Or you could decrease tensions as well.
Right.
That's also another type of term for you to say that we decrease tensions.
Yeah, you could do both of those internal link terms. So you could decrease tensions, or you could say the increase in tensions is a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Those are
really
two types.
they're both considered internal link turns. They're both offensive arguments on the internal link. With internal links, since it's really dependent on those intermediary steps, there's often a lot of overlap both with both on the link level or with the impact level. So it's a little hard to just highlight exactly what that looks like, but certainly a turn argument is just saying the opposite and getting an impact from it, right? So
you could do that on the impact turn too, so instead of saying war good, you could say that like we decrease war as an impact turn?
That would be a link turn. So because the link, remember the link is plan causes war, basically. Plan does something which leads to this. So for you to say plan does something to decrease that would be a link turn.
Okay.
And a lot of times what you're talking about would be a parallel link turn, right? So there's a straight turn, there's straight turns and parallel turns. So a straight turn is just the opposite, right? So plan kills, the link indicates why plan leads to war for this very specific reason. Maybe the U.S. is increasing cyber war against China or something, right? But there is also a parallel turn that maybe there's another important and related reason why plan solves for war. That would be a parallel turn. So it's solving the impact, but not in this specific way. Does that make sense?
So it like turns the link and the impact together?
Well, you got to think, I know we're breaking it down, but still try to conceptualize this as one whole story. So the link is the reason why plan ultimately leads to this bad thing. So any argument that says plan stops that bad thing or plan saves the world from that bad thing is still on the link level.
Okay.
And don't get, you're just starting out, and if any of you still feel uncomfortable with labeling arguments, don't get too hung up on the labels, right? If you are making the right argument, the judge will sort of understand where they're supposed to fit in to the position, and that's something that will just come with practice and just utilizing the jargon. So answering a dissad, that's how you do it. Okay, let's talk about counter plans. All right, counterplan. What's the structure?
Text.
start out with a text. So literally what the counter plan is. So if the resolution is something about distributing food aid, we'll just use an agent counter plan as an example. The U.S. is supposed to distribute food aid to some country in Africa or something like that. Your counter plan is like, no, instead of the U.S., we're going to have the AU. We're going to have the AU do it instead. So that's your text, literally your plan, except for on the negs. Next.
Is it like how it competes?
So competition, yes. What is competition?
So she's saying that's like mutually exclusive, that you can do the counter plan, and like you can't combine the counter plan with it.
Okay,
It's
so
one functional application.
yeah, so it's mutually exclusive, or it can compete through net benefits. So cool. Next. So solvency, right? How the counterplan is able to capture the case, and why your actor or why whatever you're doing will work. The same way a plan has to have solvency, well, it doesn't have to, but a lot of times it will have solvency. Your explanation of solvency goes here. Okay, so what are ways to answer the counterplan?
Firm.
Perm. What's a perm?
Test competition.
A test of competition. Yes. So when you're reading a counterplan, there's the idea that there's a forced choice between the plan and the counterplan. The judge can only pick one or the other. That's your competition section that says it's mutually exclusive. Can't do both of them at the same time. There's also the concept when you're running a counterplan that the counterplan must be better by itself than any combination of the plan and all or parts of the counterplan. Make sense? So the perm just says we can do both. We can do both the plan and the counterplan at the same time. So functionally, and when I say, what is functional competition? What does that mean?
Isn't like the implementation of the plan.
Yes, you can physically, when you think about how these things are going to be implemented at the same time, is that a thing that can realistically happen? So functionally, can the AU and the US both distribute food aid? Yes. So firm do both says, hey, both of these agents can do that, and that's probably good for a couple reasons. Those are your net benefits to the firm, which you should indicate after you read the perm. So, hey, perm's probably a good idea. Yeah. Okay. Does perms make sense? Perms competition can be a little confusing. If you don't get it right now, it's okay.
Is that all you have to say? Just like
So
firm, you can do the counter plan and the plan,
Yeah.
and then just talk about why that's good and why it can happen.
Exactly. So you will literally say perm, do both. And there are some different types of perms, but for now, just worry about perm, do both. And then you will have an explanation of how that is feasibly possible. And then you'll probably be like, hey, it's good because then more aid gets distributed, or hey, they can share resources, or, you know, hey, you have these arguments about why using maybe this one actor is bad, but then it'll shield the link from the disad because now they're both doing it, so the attention goes to the other actor. Various reasons why your perm is net beneficial.
So you can only do a perm if in their competition they don't say that it's mutually exclusive?
Oh, they're going to say it's mutually exclusive, but your job is to say that it's not.
Okay.
And it takes so little time to say perm do both that if you're an MG and you're like, I don't know what's going on this counter plan, just say perm do both. It's going to take them much longer to respond to that than it is for you to say that and provide a brief explanation. Although I will say sometimes the perm is just not viable, because it'll probably bite the dissad. Okay, how else can you answer the counterplan?
No solvency.
No solvency, right? So they have the solvency that's like, oh yeah, the AU is so awesome, and they have all these resources, and they've distributed aid before, empiric examples or something, right? I'm just giving you some context here. So you can have no solvency arguments, and no solvency. Is that a defensive argument or an offensive argument? Defensive, yes, because it is saying, no, it's not. You're lying. So you have arguments that mitigate that, say that's not the case. What other type of solvency argument should you have on the counterplan that relates to your case? A solvency deficit, right? So you should be indicating solvency deficit. That means a solvency deficit, your partner has read your case, you'll have your two advantages. Sometimes people will read counterplans that capture one advantage and not the other. Sometimes I'll read counterplans that really don't interact well at all and really don't capture your links for your case to solve your advantages. And those are called solvency deficits. This is the term for it. It's basically just a way of saying you do not solve case. Right? And your partner has already spent all this time shelling out this long story and fleshing out this big impact about why those arguments are important. So you want to indicate if the counterplan does not solve for your case. What else? So just offense, right? You want to read reasons. And you can read offensive arguments either on the counterplan, or you could even read a disadd to the counterplan on a separate sheet of paper. Sometimes I found that was just a cleaner way of addressing a whole story. So maybe you have arguments why the AU is really bad. You have examples of how they've done some bad stuff in the past. So those are offensive arguments. Read turns why, identifying the counterplan. Okay, as an MG, the first thing that goes through your mind when they read the counterplan after you ask them what the status is what is the difference between the counterplan and the plan? Because they're usually going to be similar because they're trying to capture your case. So identify what is the difference, and sometimes that's a small difference, and then generate offense against that small difference, right? Why is that tiny part that they don't do from your plan super important, outweighs everything? And try to generate as many arguments as possible as to why that's a good thing. Okay, so offense. What is another thing you can read against a counterplan?
Can you make add-ons, like additional advantages for counterplan or no?
Yes. Yeah, you can read an additional. Sometimes the counterplan, there's this awesome thing your case solves for, but maybe the counterplan solves for the advantages you did read, but they can't solve for the another advantage that plan solves for. So you can read an add-on advantage and say, hey, counterplan can't solve this, and now you have this additional impact. So yes, and you'll want to do that on a separate sheet of paper. These are all arguments you should be reading on the counterplan sheet. So an add-on advantage, yes.
Wait, can you explain that again?
Yes. And
Add-on advantage, like an advantage to the counterplan?
So you are the F. You have your case that has your couple advantages that you solve for.
Okay.
So sometimes the counterplan, maybe they can solve back for those two advantages that you did read, but they can't capture another one, right? So maybe you've read a case that says food aid is important because it solves for hunger. We'll just say that's your only advantage. It solves for hunger. But then you're like, they read this counterplan and you're like, well, our plan also solves for U.S. soft power pretty well, right? It makes our image look better when we do things and support, international communities. So you can read another advantage to your plan, right? That says U.S. soft power is low and quo, plan solves for it. And the counterplan that has the AU Act, they can't solve for U.S. soft power, right? Because they're not using the U.S. Don't worry about that too much for right now. Just focus
that
on.
makes better sense.
But yeah, so sometimes
But just
that
like-
is a strategic option.
It's like reading another advantage in your second constructive.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And that is a little more rare because it takes a lot of time to read another advantage in addition to reading all these other things. But sometimes it is very strategic and it is commonplace. Okay, so another thing is theory, right? And counterplan theory is becoming a little less common and is kind of boring to have to judge. But so a theory, depending on the type of counterplan they read, if they read like a consult counterplan or something, I would probably recommend reading theory. There are some instances in which theory is probably a good thing to stop cheating counterplans and ones that are just generally not fun.
Would you put it on a new sheet?
Up to you. Personally, I think it is easier for me to manage when it's on a new sheet, and easier for me to see how the MO's coverage is when it's on a new sheet, but it doesn't need to be. If you're not going to spend, a ton of time and it's not going to take up a full piece of paper, then you can go ahead and throw it on the counterplan. I'm not going to talk about theory too much because there, I think, are plenty of other lectures that talk about that. But if you have questions about that, come find me. Oh, another thing that you should point out that doesn't quite fit into, well, I guess it sort of fits into the other categories. You should point out that the counterplan sometimes bites the disad. So, for example, if they have read a disad that says giving food aid is bad, creates dependency or hurts the local economies, those types of things, the counterplan equally links to that, right? Because it's still doing the same thing. So sometimes people will read strategies where the counterplan bites the disad just as much as your case does. So you want to be aware of that and point that out if that's the case. So
That's if they run a counterplan with a disad?
yes, and
Okay.
most of the time the counterplan will be run with a disad, right? Because the idea is to have a cohesive strategy, which the counterplan probably solves for most of the case, but there is one small difference in the counterplan that gives them an advantage, and they will have a disad that points out why that different thing that happens in the case is bad. Does that kind of make sense?
So, in this example that you're talking about, they would read a disad on why, the United States doing it is bad.
Exactly, exactly.
And in that case, they could not say that the counterplan fights the disad.
Correct.
Okay.
And that's the idea of having a neg strategy set up that
but
way.
But it's only if they, contradict themselves on
Yes.
accident. Okay.
Exactly. And, and sometimes the way it comes out is a little different than the strategy they originally came up with, or things will shift and round, or sometimes people will just go in having multiple options, right? We'll either go for this counterplan disad strategy, or we'll have this disad we'll go for if they mishandle that. So always be aware and point that out if necessary. How long does this lecture go?
Another 10 minutes.
Another 10 minutes? Okay. Do you guys want to talk about topicality or critiques? Critiques? Okay.
One quick question.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is there a relationship between a solvency deficit and a solvency turn, or can you turn solvency on a counterplan? Like the AU makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be a solvency turn, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll throw that up here. And a lot of times people abbreviate how to answer a counterplan as post or tops or some weird combination of this. So perm, offense, solvency, theory. So if you're having trouble remembering how to answer it, or if they're just talking so fast and you're like, what's happening, just remember post, or at least some version of that. Okay. Do you guys have a bunch of questions? Because we can also just stop now and you can ask questions, or I can talk about critiques. Okay, cool. And if you have other questions, I am literally here all week, so just let.
Okay, one more question on the counterplan by
sure.
this ad thing.
So,
in this case that we're using, they would bite the disad if they said the counterplan is that the AU should give food instead of the United States, and then they write a disad on why, like, giving food, it was bad?
exactly.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
I'm ready.
there are some times when that happens, and
Okay,
when
just wanted to
not.
make sure.
Okay, critiques. What's first?
Framework.
The framework. Yes. Next.
Thesis.
Link.
Okay.
Interchangeable thesis or links.
I like to include my thesis at the bottom of the framework. Next.
Impacts.
Impacts, or sometimes they're called implications on a critique, but they're literally the same thing. And
The alternative.
that'll be easy to visualize from here. So alternative.
And
Just think of this
alternative.
kind of like a counterplan. And lastly,
Alt.
alt solvency. That is how I abbreviate solvency. Okay. So, answering a critique. What do you do?
If you're like a counterframe or like your counterinterpretation.
Right. So you can answer the framework. They're going to be like, hey, talking and stuff matters, and our methodologies and the way rhetoric shapes reality. And you can be like, no. So, counter, we'll just call it a counter framework for now. A lot of times, you'll be able to say, hey, extend cross-apply our net benefits framework out of case. It's good for X, Y, and Z. I will say overall, the framework has become much less of an issue in Paralead. I would say that most of the time it's now a race to the middle. It's generally accepted that, yeah, you're just trying to question our methodology in order to say that we don't have solvency and that it generates something bad from it, as opposed to just trying to entirely exclude the case. Does that distinction make sense? So, for example, if, how do I want to explain this? So, yeah, if it uses a flawed methodology, the case probably cannot solve. So, let's see. So, I'm just trying to come up with this on the spot. So, like, if it's extending. Right. So, if the critique is trying to, the case is trying to do something to increase rights, but it uses a bunch of like really fucked up racist, sexist language or something like that, right? That language in shaping the policy is probably going to lead to no solvency and some other bad stuff. Make sense? Cool. Okay, so you'll have your counter framework reasons why you get. Really, you just want to be able to weigh your case. Is the goal here. As long as it's still relevant, then don't get sucked into a messy framework debate that the judge probably doesn't want to deal with. Okay, what else?
Link
So,
turns.
often, what did you say?
Link turns.
Link turn. So, much like a disad, they say, hey, you do this bad thing that causes all these problems, and you say, no, we don't, we solve the problem, right? So you entrench patriarchy, you entrench all these bad things of capitalism or militarism. And you're like, no, we solve back for those bad things, right? Similarly, you can impact turn. Once again, you do not want to do both of these things at the same time. I will advise you, it is usually more effective to impact turn and provide disads to the alternative, because the whole point of a critique oftentimes is that it's something they've prepared beforehand, they're really deep on the literature. It's generic, right? It is applicable in a ton of different instances, right? Everything entrenches capitalism. So we're going to roll out this argument every round this tournament, and so you're probably going to link. You will have a much easier time, in most instances, generating offense on this level of debate, saying, yeah, we do, but it's a really good thing. Also, I find that if you're just starting to debate critiques or you're still a little confused by them, the easiest way to start answering them is they're talking, super fast, you're a little confused about what they're saying. Put your hand up. What is the thesis of your argument? Oh, well, we say capitalism is bad in some fancy language, right? You're like, oh, capitalism. Capitalism is good. And then you come up with a whole bunch of different reasons. So if you feel a little overwhelmed, put your hand up. What is the thesis? Give me a one-sentence general thesis of your argument. What is it? Whatever that thing is, you're like, sweet, that thing's awesome. And just start writing turns that way. So those would be the impact turns or disadds to the alternative, which are similar in the same thing. The alternative is trying to solve back for these things, right? So if those things are good, then it's a disadd to the alternative for them to be solving back for that. So once again, if you want to generate disadd to the alternative, I'll write it down. Because if they solve back for the impacts, which are bad, that would be a bad.
If you only have 30 minutes to prepare, who can preempt a disadd to their alternative on a critique? If you can't bring anything in, or I don't know. I feel like that'd be weird if they were like.
Well, when I say disadd to the alternative, I don't mean separate disadd, you can do this blah 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 on a separate sheet. This is more a way of categorizing what those offensive arguments are. They will be terms.
Okay, so that's why the alternative is bad.
Yes, but they are also disadvantages to the alternative. So yeah, but just to use those terms. Similarly, the entirety of the critique, you can be making defensive arguments, right? So you can make no-link arguments. Sometimes it is strategic to say, we might link to parts of this, but we don't link to every single thing ever. That you're forcing us to defend this huge system. We're not defending that. So you can do that. You can have impact defense. That maybe this thing you're claiming isn't really causing these things as much as possible. You should definitely have solvency defense. So no solvency arguments. Because the alternative probably isn't going to solve. So that's one of the best ways to generate arguments. Yeah, so with a critique, generating offense on the bottom level is probably your best strategy. Yeah.
Is it smart to impact turn the critiques and then do no solvency though?
For me, I always like to read a different diversity of arguments, right? Because even if, sorry, I forgot an important one.
Perm.
Similarly, you can also perm the alternative. I think you could do that. I think that's smart. That way you provide, yourself with a diversity of arguments, and you might force them to kick out of their alternative, or have, the alternative basically goes away if they don't solve for it. So then, sans this, then all of a sudden you still have options up here. But yes, so the perm, similarly that, hey, we can combine the plan and the alternative, probably solves better because we have a multiplicity of voices and everyone's being included, which helps your movement, blah, 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 blah. Yeah.
Can you read theory to a critique?
You can read theory, yes. So in their framework, they will probably provide a justification of why they get to read the critique. So you can read theory. Again, you can put it here or you can put it on a new sheet. I would say that unless they have a really abusive framework that really tries to exclude you or something like that, I would probably stick to more of the offensive arguments that are more substantive. I guess I'd advise that throughout debate. Substance is usually preferable than theory because that puts the W really more in the hands of the judge because it takes it away from what you're probably best at. But yes, you can read theory. Things like you don't specify what your post-alt world looks like. Those types of arguments are much less common than they once were, and it's much less. Frame critiques are just much more generally accepted now, which is a good thing because, like I said, most of the time now they are just racing to the middle. You still can weigh your case. It is just a test of methodology. But if you are super confused, or maybe it's a good thing to give more control to the judge, more of a coin flip, yes, theory is certainly still an option and a tool that you can use if you feel it's appropriate. Yes?
So would you frame impact terms as dissents to the alt, or?
Depends, but usually that's what it is, right?
Okay.
If solving for those impacts, the impact turns demonstrate that the impacts are actually a good thing, which means solving for them through the alternative would be bad. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Other questions about critiques? Yes.
What's the perm double bind argument that people use for critiques?
The perm
in
double
industrial?
bind. Oh god. So either you don't have solvency, and this is paraphrasing this in a really poor way, but either the perm doesn't have solvency because it can't overcome, or oh god, why am I forgetting this? It's in my laptop.
I think I wrote it right here if you want to just read it.
Perfect, read it.
Either the permutation solves the entirety of the critique, or or if the case prevents solvency, the alternative is not strong enough to solve the many instances of the critique that will happen at this tournament and definitely into the future.
Does that make sense?
Yep. Thank you.
So it's no. Okay, so it's either
What are we talking about? The what?
Sorry.
So this is a common argument that gets read against the alternative that either it should be good enough to overcome all the problems of the case, or it's not strong enough to do anything at all, right? It's a double bind that says, it's either too weak or it's too strong, or not strong enough. Other questions?
So that basically just saying like the critique isn't stopping the arguments.
Right. So either the critique cannot actually do what it's talking about, or if you combine it with plan, it's really an argument that goes for the perm, right? The idea of combining the critique and the alternative. They're going to stand up and say, no, you can't do that, because the plan is just going to overwhelm it with all these bad things.